Also, let's talk about Kemi Badenoch, Conservative Party leader. Yesterday we were talking about the strategy of the Conservatives and why it seems that they are waiting to cut through. On Christmas Eve, I think it was, Kemi Badenoch gave an interview to Amal Rajan, or it was released then, saying that she's not going to just come up with policy off the hoof. She wants to really think things through, and was having a bit of a dig at reform about that. Then we saw the polling numbers saying that Reform were a bit more of a threat to Labour. Then we saw the Reform membership potentially overtaking the Conservative membership. Well, it's now at over 137,000. So it has well overtaken the Conservatives, who are around 131,000. All right? So that's where we are with the membership numbers. However, Kemi Badenoch has now come out and questioned these numbers. She's accused Reform of faking them. She said that in this digital age, it's very, very easy to fake these numbers. And so it's ended up with a spat between Farage and Badenoch. Badenoch accuses Farage of fakery, says the I paper this morning. Meanwhile, we have the Telegraph, I think, also leading on this story. It's one of the banner stories for the Times as well. Times saying Tory anger as Farage claims surge in members. Kemi Badenoch accusing Nigel Farage of faking a surge in Reform membership after the party claimed to have surpassed the Conservatives. Telegraph, it's their main story. Tory war with Farage over fake members. And Farage has responded to this alleged fakery by saying, well, give us an audit. Give us an audit of our membership numbers. This is embarrassing for you. Give us an audit. And why don't you do the same with your membership numbers, Ms. Badenoch? So manipulating your own supporters at Christmas, Nigel, said Kemi. Farage doesn't understand the digital age. This kind of fakery gets found out pretty quickly, although not before many are fooled. Nigel Farage responded saying, we understand you are bitter, upset and angry that we are now the second biggest party in British politics and that the Conservative brand is dying under your leadership. However, this is not an excuse to accuse us of committing fraud. We will gladly invite one of the big four firms in to audit our membership numbers as long as you do the same. What do you think, Benedict Spence? Do you think that this is an own goal by Kemi Badenoch? She must be pretty confident that she's right about this fakery to have made this accusation, but Nigel Farage coming out fighting.
I think it's rather undignified to get your members out in public and compare the sizes like this, especially at this time of year. It's also, it must be said, it's not an entirely relevant thing. You know, we had this, didn't we, when Jeremy Corbyn was leader of the Labour Party, and they talked about how many members he was bringing in, how many new members, and that this was a sort of an indication of quite how important he was and how... You all right, Cristo? I'm so sorry. I thought you'd manage, but no. Oh, right, I will draw attention to it. It was rather funny, wasn't it? No, but we had that with Jeremy Corbyn and Labour.
Yeah. I'm trying to do serious politics here, Spence.
I thought I could carry it on. And that this was an indication that they were going to sweep into power and that the paradigms in British politics were going to change. And did that happen? No, not really, because if you just get in people who all think the same way as you or are doing this sort of to spite the other side, that's not necessarily an indication of anything. It is, I think, a demonstration of the discontent with the two major parties that Reform might be getting, this many people signing up. But the problem is, and this is something I think that you mentioned with Kemi Badenoch as well, what are the actual policies at play? Now, Reform will come out and say that they've got this sort of contract, haven't they, with the British people, not a manifesto, but they've got lots of policies across the board. But actually, if you ask the average person what do Reform really stand for, they could probably tell you what they stand for on immigration, although it turns out that that's changing slightly, and they could maybe tell you what they stand for on tax. And that's it, really, and that's not a lot. But at the same time...
But a lot of people would argue that those are the two biggest aspects of their life.
That's certainly two very major ones, but of course it's not enough necessarily. It's enough for people who are very dejected with the situation in general in this country to go, oh yes, I like low tax, yes, I'd like there to be fewer immigrants. That sounds promising, but is that enough for you to build a movement on that could potentially form a government? Probably not. Whereas, as you pointed out, the Conservatives under Kemi Badenoch, well, do we really know what they stand for? No. Even though she's somebody who supposedly has been sort of up to her eyeballs in policy her entire time in politics, which is not inconsiderable, she has yet to sort of come out with a raft of policies or anything. And I understand and I respect the fact that the Tories are trying to find themselves.
And I respect, by the way, that she's doing what we have all, I think, any of the sane of us have been craving for a while, which is, please just stop blustering us with rubbish and actually come out with something that you'll be able to enforce, something you would actually be able to bring in. Don't lie to us, because I think sometimes in our digital age, in our 24-hour news cycle age, in our headline-obsessed age, we kind of get the politicians we deserve by voting in the ones that will make amazing promises rather than the ones that have thought things through. And I think that she should be credited for that. Whether it will work, whether it's a gamble that will mean that the vacuum gets filled up by reform, because Nigel Farage is a phenomenal politician. You love him or loathe him. He's a brilliant campaigner. He's brilliant at getting the headlines, and whether that's going to be a risk she's taking by doing that remains to be seen. But I do think she deserves respect for not playing that game. I just wonder whether the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I wonder whether she's with her first big attack here that she's got, or seemingly seems to have around the Christmas period, has she gone for the right target? There are so many open goals around Labour at the moment. And is she at risk of actually intimidating? Because I think that the Conservatives have got a tough job at the moment to try and win back the Reform voters that are probably going from the Conservatives, maybe slightly more likely from the Conservatives than Labour, though Labour are losing support to Reform. So I think the Conservatives have got more of a tough job to try and get those people back. And I wonder whether going on attack against Reform at this time, so far off an election, will actually backfire when there are so many open goals around Labour.
The thing is, I don't think you get much political capital going after Labour, because the voters will justifiably turn around and go, yeah, they're rubbish. And who were the people that were in charge before? Oh, that's right, it was you. You know, it's the Conservatives, actually, that are responsible for a lot of the mess that the country finds itself in. And actually, a lot of Reform's current voters are more natural Conservative voters. Now, you're right, actually, that Reform is going after Labour more now because there's a lot of hay to be made there. But it's an existential question for the Conservatives. Those two parties can't coexist, Reform and the Conservatives. They can't coexist and there be any hope of one of them winning enough seats to win a general election. And before people start saying, as they will, well, there needs to be some sort of electoral pact, there needs to be some sort of coalition, there won't be. There really won't be. A lot of Reform voters and a lot of Reform members hate the Conservatives because of the situation that the country currently finds themselves in. And there are people in the Conservative Party who would happily lose general elections to keep Nigel Farage away from power. You know, that's the situation we find ourselves in. And that's probably why, actually, I think Labour feels that it can go quite as hard and as fast as it currently is on some of the more damaging aspects of what it's currently doing, because it is calculating that come the next general election, it will have a smaller majority, but it will still have a majority because the Tories and Reform will just end up taking chunks out of each other and letting Labour in a lot of those sort of swing seats. So that's the situation that we find ourselves in. There's not going to be a coalition, there's not going to be a pact, so one of them has to try to kill the other. So I understand why Kemi would go on the attack now. I don't think she's good enough to beat Farage, is the key thing. As much as you're right in that it's admirable that she's trying to sort of set this out as a, well, we're not there yet, we don't want to lie to you, so we're going to get, you some policies that we've taken our time over. As much as that's good, Farage doesn't need to worry about that because his party, that train has already left the station, it's gaining force, it's gaining speed. So he can just come out and be a very good campaigner, because actually he's got a very rare opportunity now to smash the Conservatives into smithereens.
All right, so lots for us to unpack there. So firstly, is Reform the right target for the Conservatives at the moment? Secondly, what would the Conservatives, what should they be doing in order to try and win you back? Is this the right strategy? can the two parties coexist, or will one kill the other? It does seem like a bizarre attack as well. If you are, you have to be completely sure. If there can only be one person right in this, either Kemi's right, they faked it, or Farage is right and they haven't, in which case one of them is going to look a little bit foolish as a result of this. So it seems like quite a bizarre attack strategy. But maybe I'm wrong. Francis, morning to you. You acknowledged my message yesterday, but I'm not sure you like being teased. We're talking this morning about Kemi Badenoch's attack on the Reform Party and Nigel Farage, and accusing them of faking their numbers. Nigel Farage saying, well, look, we're happy to have an audit. Of course, Reform's membership numbers have now surpassed the Conservatives. You acknowledged my message yesterday, but I'm not sure you like being teased. Did you tease me yesterday? I don't mind being teased. Cut Kemi some slack. She's only been in the post 7 weeks. Was elected on a longer-term review of all things Conservatives as part of the Renewal 2030 platform, which I helped support her. The sheer speed of the collapse of the Labour government and media frenzy, for instance, results has changed dynamics. A measurement of membership is not helpful. Core vote is, says Francis from Wilton. I just think this is really ill-advised. I actually do cut Kemi some slack on this Renewal 2030 and coming up with really good long-term policy. I really do see the logic in that. I wonder whether it will backfire, as I've said, because of the media age and the instant result age that we have. But I admire the fact that she's not being tempted by this whole, I've got to give you something right now to get the headlines. But my spidey sense tells me that this was a mistake. Because I think also, even if she believes they faked the figures, right, she's just drawn attention to the figures. I would have perhaps kept a dignified silence on this and kept with the line, membership numbers mean less than policy decisions, and from me you will get policy, not those sorts of numbers. And I wonder whether, yes, that might not be as sexy a headline. It might not have got us all as excited, but I think it would have actually long-term been something that would have benefited her more than this kind of attack. You may disagree. 0344 499 1000. Benedict Spence, a political commentator, still joins me. I mean, aside from whether this is true or not, whether these numbers have been faked or not, and of course Reform deny this, she has just, again, anyone who wasn't sure or wasn't really aware that these Reform numbers were surging, she's just told everyone who was Conservative, who might follow her, look at these numbers over here. Yeah,
it's not the best strategy. And as you say, it's not policy. It's nothing that sort of really matters. It's simply, a sign that they are in the ascendancy, whether they're true or not. And if they're not true, it's a proper kind of shrug, who cares moment. It's one of those things where, if it is, it signals improvement. And if it's not, it'll be forgotten about within a couple of days. It won't matter.
And the Reform people whom have joined are not going to be saying, oh, my word, I think I've been fooled. They'll be saying, oh, well, it's clearly got to you then. Yeah. That's what it's going to be saying to everyone. And I just wonder whether, from a strategic point of view, if I was in strategic communications, whether I would be saying right now, is this the hill you want to die on when it comes to Reform? There's we've spoken a lot in the last couple of days about the Reform policy about stopping the boats and the Navy being involved and how it was tried before and all of these sorts of things and the potential for that not really being a thought-through policy. That's the kind of thing you should be going after Reform on if you want to go for Reform rather than something like this. But maybe I'm wrong. And maybe this is something that she... Do you want to say something else?
What I would say just on that is the problem with criticising Reform on things like that is because it's a slightly outlandish suggestion, but one of those things that a lot of people might go, yeah, well, we've tried everything else, to just sort of turn around and say, well, it's not going to work. It's not constructive enough. It's not positive enough. And dare I say it, it's exactly the sort of thing that so irritated so many Conservatives about the Tories when they were in government. This sort of, oh, well, you can't do this because the woke lawyers say this and the woke civil service, everything's so difficult.
The Navy.
Well, or the woke Navy. Well, that's the thing. If you just as the now party of opposition, having spent 14 years saying, well, we'd love to actually improve things, but the computer says no. If you then, in opposition, say, well, these people who you are promising you change can't do it because when we were there, the computer says no. So take it from us. It won't work. People aren't going to respond to that. They're not going to care. They're going to say, well, that was you. You tried that. Maybe let's give these people a go.
I think you've just summed up the real difficulty for the Conservatives at the moment, because any major problem that they go after any other party on, the party's going to say, well, how well did you do at that?
Yeah, and this is, again, it's the problem that they have with Labour as well, is that everybody just turns around and goes, well, thanks very much for your wisdom on whatever this policy is. You've got us into this situation in the first place. And I think also there is a sense that because they are an establishment party, they have a sort of a very narrow view, which is that things can only be done a certain way. One of the reasons why people like insurgent populist political movements is because they promise, they don't always deliver, but they promise to sort of smash through the bureaucracy, the red tape, the lawyers, the legalese, all of that sort of thing. So whilst you might have the Conservative Party, which is populated by people with a legal background, for instance, saying you can't do X, Y, Z, if Reform come around and go, well, we plan on being the government, and spoiler alert, when you're the government, you can just do things. People quite like that. It's what Trump did, and it's what actually helped get him re-elected.
People like the train set to be smashed up now and then.
Yeah, they do. But this might sound really strange because we've got this idea in this country that we're a liberal, open democracy and that everything is very sort of progressive. Actually, people quite like their government to act like a government, and that is something that has absolute power. If we're being completely honest here, every now and then they like the government to demonstrate. When it comes to important things, like, for instance, national security, your own border, they quite like their government to go, yes, we are the supreme authority here, and we're going to stop these people breaking the law. Whereas what we've had is a series of governments going, oh, what are we possibly going to do? The lawyers say we can't.
Covering lawyers, civil servants, the Navy, all of these things, and Tories discovered it, that you can have majorities and you can have all these things, but if those people aren't on board, or if there are too many hurdles and too much admin and red tape that stops it.
Yeah. Dominic Cummings has spoken a lot about this. Well, his big raison d'etre when he got in was we need to completely smash the civil service and change it because it doesn't want to work. It's not just that it doesn't want to work in the best interest of the country. But what he is, a lot of people in the Labour government are saying
there was a really interesting... we will speak to Stephen, but we'll do it after the break now because, Benedict's prattled on.
He's started now.
But, but there was a really interesting piece in The Guardian, of all places, actually saying that and I can't remember the writer about it, saying this is what Keir Starmer is finding, and that actually a lot of people privately in Labour are saying we don't agree with the Conservatives, but actually maybe Dominic Cummings was right because there's a lot we want to do, and we can't because the civil service isn't letting it happen.
The key problem, though, is there's only one person who has the authority to make these changes, to fire people, to appoint people. That's the Prime Minister. He can't do it, actually, with the civil service on the scale that ours currently is. He cannot be responsible for going through every single individual person who isn't doing their job, and a lot of them aren't doing their jobs correctly, and say, you're fired, get out of here. And actually, he can't do it as much as anything else because there are a lot of vested interests in his own party not allowing him to do it.
And also the people then below will go, well, hang on, why are you firing that person? Why should we be loyal to Lou? So
exactly.
It is a nightmare.